to be going over the idea of trying to debunk the voter fraud conspiracy that has been going around, that basically that we've seen Donald Trump try to feed and try to come up with these ideas that somehow the Democrats have been trying to cheat him out of the election, and we're going to show how this is clearly untrue. And we're going to be showing just by some data from 270 to win with their data so far, and show how this is clearly untrue. And we're going to be using this to actually show it through not only the presidential election, but also the House of Representatives and the House of Senate elections, to actually show this is clearly untrue. Now, the way we can show this is because when we look at some of these things, that even if there was fraud with it, there would need to be enough, just even within the presidential election, to be enough to actually prove that it would overthrow a state to one way or the other. This is what the actual courts look for when they actually do something. There would need to be enough that would cause it to swing one way or the other. And when we start to see it, historically, we've seen that the most votes that have been for any of these states in any recount or any through canvassing, it has never caused any change in the actual state in the history of our country. And if we start to see some of these states that he's looking for, we can see Wisconsin. We'll look at this. We can actually see that Biden is up by over 20,000 votes. And that we can actually see the number is far greater than what would be that necessary for the to grasp that. We can see Michigan, that's another one that he wants. And we can see that Michigan is up by over 100,000 votes there. We can see Pennsylvania, Biden leads by over 50,000, over 40,000 votes there. We can go over to Georgia, which is another crucial one. Biden leads by about 10,000 votes. We can go over to Arizona. Biden leads by about, what's that, 18,000, 17 to, about 17,000 votes. We can go out to Nevada, where he leads by about 36,000 votes. And as we start to look at this, we can actually see those with it. We can actually look at other states as well. Actually, that if he wants to even question Minnesota with it, Minnesota, he leads by several 100,000 there. I mean, there's nothing else along the lines of here with these were all guaranteed for him. And even if we're going to, I mean, there's nothing in which he would have any shot in with it. North Carolina is still going, and that's considered already in Trump's favor. And Trump is actually set to either win it or is going to be a coin flip. And Alaska is supposed to be in his favor. So there would be, essentially, when we look at this, we see that there's no possibility of any court cases actually flipping him over. Now, if Biden is to actually get his agenda across with it, he would essentially need not only the House of Representatives in his favor, but also the Senate clearly in his favor. Because especially in a polarized system, he's going to, for him to actually get his agenda through, he's going to have to basically have, if there's some type of like mass conspiracy, or vast conspiracy, I should say, that that he's going to have at least 60 votes or near it to actually get of and have Republicans in his favor to actually get something through. Now, when we look at this, we can actually see in the House, we can actually see that they're expected to lose seats. It's looking like they should get the advantage, even with the toss-ups. If they win toss-ups, kind of like splitting them, it looks like they will keep the House of Representatives, so they'll keep that. But when you look over here, we can see in the Senate, the most that they can actually do is actually have it, even if they win both runoffs in Georgia, the most that they could ever win is 51. That's a bare minimum advantage. And that means the VP will never come into play on those votes, even if on those votes. That means they cannot win. They cannot win anything on a budget deal. The best they could do on a budget deal is actually let the budget expire and have everything non-controversial go up, which is not going to be in their favor because they're going to lose many of the things they want. Which means that which means they're not going to get any new spending. The best that they could actually do is actually lose a lot of Republican spending that they find problematic, and that would be the best that they could actually do because of the way the Senate is formed. Now, if there were any type of vast conspiracy, this is not exactly the way to actually do it, because it merely just flipped over from one way to the other. And that shows that people did not vote the way they thought they were going to vote. And that's something in which did not work if they were actually looking for some vast conspiracy for voter fraud to work in their favor. If they would have worked far better in the Senate for them to do it than actually on the president. The president is not actually a necessary position to do it because you have people across the country, and doing it state by state, it's not as necessary. When you go state by state here, it's far more necessary because this actually controls policy and how you can actually get the budgets through to actually get these things done that the president wants to do. If the president can't get it through and is dealing with actually a split Congress, he's not going to get anything through. The best he can actually do is undo the executive orders and the regulatory things that the previous president had put through. That's the most that person can do. Meaning, if the person before put through tariffs and they find the tariffs to be problematic and destructive to the country, they can remove them. They can also change a lot of the internal policies that the executive was doing. They can change those policies around. They can change the way the policies for immigration have gone with the way they interpret them. They can also if they interpret it for immigration, if they interpret it in such a way that they interpret it in on a constitutional way, in such a different way that is different than what's actually written by Congress, they can actually interpret it in a completely different way. If they actually find that immigration is not what it called does not align with the Commerce Clause and has nothing to do with the Commerce Clause, they could theoretically go with open borders if they wanted to, but it's not likely that this is going to happen. So for those who think that's going to happen, it's not likely because, as we see with the agenda of the party, that's not going to happen, and you wouldn't even need Congress to actually do that. That could merely just be from an interpretation of the law and of and state that the Commerce Clause has no bearing in the actual immigration policy. and we can actually look at it through that lens, and they can merely just use the State Department to set the standards of what one would need to enter the country, and this would be reciprocated by all other countries. When we look at when we look at this, we can see that this shows that there is no voter fraud, and we can actually see that if voter fraud is going to exist, it is definitely going to exist specifically right now through the if Democrats are going to do it, it is going to exist right now through the actual Senate. Because right now, the way it looks is that we see that the Senate is not very favorable to the Democrats right now. And this is something in which is very, very important for them to realize. And we need to start looking at this because of the because of this fact on what we currently have, and we're not going to see this as what we're currently dealing with, and we're not going to see the Senate currently have these. We're not going to currently see the Senate currently have the makeup of since we see them not currently having the makeup in which is on the side of being decidingly Democrat. Like, we didn't see Maine go toward the Democrats. We didn't see West Virginia flip. We did not see Kentucky flip in that area with it. We didn't see Iowa flip. Other areas like Kansas did not flip. Arkansas did not go for the libertarian spot. Other areas, South Carolina did not flip. Montana did not go with Bullock. So we did not see these other areas with it that could have easily have flipped over, giving them their seats with it, because I mean they would have needed another nine seats plus these other spots. North Carolina is not decided yet with it, but they seem to be leaning on Tillis there, as well as this one seems to be leaning on Sullivan. So if I mean, at most they could probably get up to 51. Then at best they would, and even if they win this, they could get up to 53. They would still needed another 7 seats, in which they did not get, and that was the whole thing. And that's what we need to realize with this, is that's why we see that when it comes down to this, is there was no vast conspiracy. That vast conspiracy idea is debunked. Now let's get to some of the individual things. Now we've seen some of the individual things start to come out, like using a Sharpie on the actual forms of the actual election ballots. Now this is untrue, because when we actually see the election ballots, we've actually seen, like in Wisconsin, that's the state which I vote in, we've actually seen that this is not the case, because in 2016 and 2018, this is actually what we were actually using. And if this was actually the case in Wisconsin, in those years, that means President Trump would never have been elected, and we would have actually have seen that if he wasn't elected in those years with it, we would have actually seen a complete different outlook. We have seen in which and so we know that that is a complete fabrication, and that where these have come out with it is beyond my knowledge with it, because I have no idea where they came up with these ideas, because as we know, voter machines can actually read a bunch of types of ink. And another one has been what it called this myth of burning have been a couple of states have been linked to burning or dumping ballots, and this has basically been completely fabricated because when you start to zoom up on them, you can actually see that these are actually sample ballots and not real ballots. So we know that this is actually a hoax that has been perpetrated to make it look like it's a real thing. We've also seen a bunch of things of some of the these weird type of conspiracies on top of that, and some of these weird stories of basically stating that, oh, a bunch of dead people are voting and a bunch of these other cases with it, but nothing is actually, no actual real evidence of any vast voter fraud has actually come forward. And even if there's these vast numbers, like they try to state, like they've tried to state like 3,500 cases in Nevada and the same thing with Arizona. Well, let's look at Nevada. Even if you take 3,500 cases with this for that, you can actually see that would, even if you take 3,500 votes with it and add that to Trump, that still makes him far shy of Biden. Even if you say they for some reason you say they flipped it to Biden, that would be taking 3,500 away from Biden, adding 3,500 to Trump. That's a 7,000 difference right there with it. It still is well shy of it in that one with it. If you take it in Arizona, this is another one that they've tried to do the same thing. Guess what? You're still well shy. This means there is no case in either of those two states. We have not seen that. We have not seen that idea brought down here. We've just been seeing complaints of them counting votes. That's merely what it called merely the complaint here is them counting votes in Georgia. That's been the actual complaint. Now these are actually provisional votes and mail-in votes, most of which are actually coming in. There were mail-in votes, and a lot of the mail-in votes come in from people that were A, concerned by the coronavirus, and B, from military personnel. Now, if we want to demean military personnel with it, I mean, this is not new to someone like Donald Trump. And this should, if they want to do this, that's fine with it. But the fact is we should understand that this should not be part of the election. If you want to demean military personnel, keep that on your own time with it. But these are people that actually do deserve the right to vote. They are citizens. Military personnel are citizens, and they do deserve the right to vote. If you're willing to sacrifice your life for your country with it, you deserve the right to vote. It doesn't matter which way you want to vote. And the same thing has happened in other states as well with it. Just because a lot of people don't understand how the counting goes within your state does not mean that they're not valid numbers. What's actually happening is they're supposed to be postmarked basically by that certain date. They can be counted after that date. They just had to be postmarked, basically meaning in that box by that date. They could be arriving after that date. Now, certain states with it had limits of what time they could arrive with it, which means it had to be essentially postmarked before that date. Pennsylvania had what it called had a leeway that was longer with it, which is why there's kind of court battles around that, saying it had to be postmarked before that, which is why there's arguments around when it could be postmarked. That's why they're segregating votes that arrived after the voting dates, but were actually postmarked on the date, and that's why there's a separation between those votes, and those votes will not be counted until until there is a valid clearance of those. But since they've essentially have already cleared the state as already Biden winning it, it actually does not even matter. Though that would actually only raise as what people figured, that would only raise Biden's number, because mail-in votes are actually decidingly coming in Biden's favor in that state. And when we start to look at those votes, we would only find a higher number. And when we that's why when we start to see these cases, these cases are actually fraudulent cases just to push along the thing. We've also seen the case of basically where we see that this is merely just not willing to accept the outcome of the election. This is why the uh, Trump administration's person that's supposed to hand along for the information for transition actually has refused and to hand the information along to the Biden administration for transition, and is just doing it for petty reasons, because they're just trying to drag this thing along. Frankly, with it, the usual thing is usually you hand it along for the transitional purposes, because usually what ends up happening is usually you end up when the actual numbers, specifically when you have multiple states that have actually declared where there's a clear winner, where basically you have a clear cut path, and where there would be virtually no path for victory in this case, without an insane chain of legal wins, which would be impossible. uh, the other side would concede and basically say we have to hand this over, and the whole thing is over, is a farce, to actually continue this whole thing, claiming this mass voter fraud and mass conspiracy, this vast conspiracy that to go after Trump. Now Trump has always used this in part of this whole nationalism garbage, which is basically this worship of the state. This is the whole idea of nationalism, is worship of the state. And this is us versus them. Foreigners are bad, and foreigners are the enemy. And to demean all forms of media except for the media that basically worships him and refuses to put out any bad information. This is why Trump was even attacking Fox when Fox dared to call Arizona in for Biden, when we clearly know that Arizona is going for Biden. Now, 270 to win is not called it yet, but we see Politico, Fox, and the AP has already called it for Biden. We see Georgia. Georgia, it has not been called yet. Georgia, there is no path to victory for Trump. The only ones that are actually really in play are North Carolina and Alaska. That's the only ones that are actually truly left. Every other state is done. And when we see this, we can see that basically if there was any actual conspiracy, it would have actually been done through the actual Senate, in which we see right here that since there's two on runoff, and since there's set to be technically a tie right now plus two runoff, we can actually see that there is not some vast conspiracy. Since the Senate was already very very close to begin with, you would have actually seen a massive blue wave in the Senate specifically. Even if there wasn't in the House, it would have been in the Senate specifically. You would have actually seen areas like Maine, areas like Montana, areas like potentially Kansas, uh, areas potentially in Texas because Cornyn's not as popular. Um, Areas like potentially in Kentucky with it because McConnell is not the strongest. West Virginia is a potential uh, out there. Areas like Maine because Susan Collins isn't the strongest candidate. With it, as I said, You would have had South Carolina with Lindsey Graham, not the strongest there. You would have had potentially with Arkansas because because you would have had Ricky Harrington Jr. getting the libertarian votes plus the Democratic votes combining together for Cotton. If they would have all come out, if there would have actually been some type of conspiracy. And frankly, what this was there was no conspiracy. If there was, you would have found those to be knocked out. You would have seen states that are toss-ups like Cunningham and Gross winning. Those are the two toss-ups. So what you would have actually seen this happen is basically is that he would have actually been a case of losing all of those. He would have been actually losing all of those spots with that. Because right now, with that, as we said, it's potentially it's like 52 at most that they can get, which is not enough to actually get your stuff passed through because you still, just for a budget, you still need another 8 because they're definitely not going to be interested in letting a budget basically expire. Alabama, they lost Doug Jones. I mean, these were ones they lost with. If they would have gotten Doug Jones re-upped, that would have actually helped. Iowa, they were hoping for Greenfield there with it. I mean, these were ones that they were hoping for to get through. And because they could with it, they could get these other spots. They lost the possibility of getting that 60. And now, if they would have gotten 60, then some people could have asked questions. If you look at other positions such as like governor, if there were such things with it, there were that we could have asked questions with it. I mean, governor, you would have thought that they would have had some type of situation that they would have won. Well, guess what? The one before with it was a 26 Republican, 24 Democrat. Well, guess what? After there were 23 Democrat and 27 Republicans. Republicans also actually gained one. You're talking that basically that the Montana governor actually flipped from blue to red, and so if we're talking that we've actually seen that they've actually lost on the governor's races as well, and that should be a little bit of a key to show that if there was some vast conspiracy, which we know there's not, that conspiracy did not exactly play out like how they would have thought, and it would be essentially the most incompetent conspiracy because if there was some vast conspiracy, I mean, wouldn't you think that they would have won Indiana or at least gotten the Libertarian elected? Wouldn't you have think that they would have won West Virginia and at least beat a what I call former at least beat the former Democrat that turned Republican? I mean, wouldn't you have think that they would have? I mean, out in Vermont, I mean, Vermont is a blue state. Wouldn't you have think they would have at least gotten that? And New Hampshire tends to kind of be able to swing. They can swing either way. Don't you think they would have gotten that one? Um, Montana, that should have been able. They should have been able to at least gotten that because that blue. They were a blue state before. You would think that that was a coin flip. Uh, North Dakota with it, I can understand with it. Missouri, they can go either way, and yet they reelected Mike Parson there with it. But I mean, if you look at some of these things with it, I mean, they should have been able to actually add a couple of seats if they're really polling. If they're really polling something in that. When it came down to the Senate, they should have either gotten 60 seats if there was really voter fraud, or actually gotten damn near close to it. When it comes to the House, they should have been able to either match it or actually increase their seats if there were voter fraud. And when it comes down to the president, if it were president, wouldn't you have think if there were voter fraud that they would have grabbed more seats? What about Florida? You really think they would have lost Florida and made it that tight and made people wait if there were voter fraud? Like this some vast conspiracy to make people wait this long for a declared winner? Like it's some dramatic win. I don't think they wanted some dramatic win when it comes down to things. I can guarantee you if they're going to do any voter fraud, it's going to be down in Florida. Florida is going to be a key thing, with especially being as high as it is for number. You're talking it's tied for the third most electoral points with New York State. I guarantee you that that is going to be one that they're going to want to grab. If they're going to be doing it in any state, it's going to be Florida and Texas. If they're going to be doing anything, and they would have tried to essentially snag both of them, essentially to knock off the race as soon as possible and try to get well over 400 points. Didn't happen. In fact, Trump won Florida and Texas, and since he's won Florida with it, it should make you a little bit more questionable about what Florida is with it, because essentially the things he said about uh, about the Hispanic people, it should make you a little bit questionable about that, and especially with the amount of people that voted for the Green Party when Biden was going to essentially was going to aim to enact those plans. It should make you a little bit questionable why people are voting for the Green Party instead of the Democratic Party. And then Rocky De La Fuente, uh, why he was running as an independent when he's actually a former Democrat with basically the same exact platform as Joe Biden. Why people were actually voting for him as well with it. I mean, if they were interested in his platform, why wouldn't they vote for Biden? So if there were actually any type of voter fraud with it, there should have been considerable amounts of that when it comes down to some of the stuff down in Florida. I think you could actually made a case for some of that happening, and especially some of the actions late they were happening late in Texas. You can definitely say some of the stuff that would be qualifying as that. If you look at some of the stuff with that was happening against Biden's camp with it, you can actually make the case for that for what was happening down in Texas, and we can actually make the case for that. So there's more of a case against Trump than there is actually for Trump, and especially with what was actually going against Jorgensen by the Trump campaign. There was basically harassment of her campaign, even in like Cleveland during one of the debates by cops. They were actually backing Trump, and we've actually seen several different cases of this, and it was just basically to protect a potential win for him. And so we know that's a potential case with it. We don't see much when it comes to the Biden camp with it, because the Biden camp was not doing these things to harass people. But we've seen the Trump campaign do things to harass libertarian voters, and we weren't seeing this stuff when it comes down to harassment of third party voters from the case of Biden doing it with like the Green Party or the Socialist Party. We weren't seeing that happening when it comes down to Biden. Biden was merely trying to bring his people forth and trying to gather a coalition of people to vote for him. Whether you like his platform or not, with it, he was just having a different approach, and it was a peaceful approach, not doing it through violence and coercion like the nationalist Trump was doing, and we see that it was completely different. And that's basically what decided the election. As Trump lost all of his libertarian supporters because he never kept up with his promises, and you can't just make promises all day and not keep them. And you can't say, "Well, I'll do something with it," and like such as bring home the troops and not do it, and keep promising every single year and not do it, and say, "Well, things came up, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to be voted out." And he found out what ended up happening, and there was, as we see, there was no voter fraud. This was a matter of the case of where or enough voter fraud to even change any single state. This is a case to where there was uh, just basically a poorly designed campaign, and people basically, when it came come down to it, is they were just voting basically because they were sick of tribalism in the country. They were sick of basically the fighting between people. I don't think it fell as much as on what the things that they were trying to highlight. I think it was the tribalism, and then they understood that the tariffs that were being done were destroying the country and causing bankruptcies and higher costs in the actual stores when they were trying to buy things because they understood how tariffs work, and then they understood that. And then when we look at the actual, as I've gone over before, when they actually went over the things like betting, when you look at the actual betting differences, you can actually see there's actual a drop off for Trump when he went after legal immigrants and basically said we're going to shut this whole thing down. When that happened, that derailed his whole campaign. It was just over right then and there, and that was during the midsummer. When he did that, that was it. His campaign, he might as well basically had resigned right there and said, I'm not going to run. I'm just going to hand it to someone else." Because once he did that, it was over. I'm going to end it right here because I've gone over the whole thing, basically debunking the whole thing of voter fraud, because we obviously don't see any evidence, because obviously he's not put together any evidence except for just basically complaining like a little child, and that's why we've seen these lawsuits thrown out one by one. And we're going to end it here, and I will see you next time with another video, which I'm not sure what it's going to be about at this time. Bye, everyone.